Excellent. Right. Well, we'll get we're at 10:34. That was the number I picked. So we'll get cracking at this point and carry on with the webinar. So firstly, thank you so much for giving up your time to join us today. I've got around 10 slides, I guess. There's a few polls in here as well to get a little bit of interaction from you all, and a few questions that if you could get involved with, that would be fantastic. They're polls where you can kind of put in as many words as you want. They're word cloud based polls, but to really help steer some of the conversation, I think, for us. There is a Q&A, there is a chat within this webinar as well. My colleague Stella will be monitoring that certainly while I'm presenting, because I won't be able to see that once I stop presenting and don't need some of my notes. We will I'll be able to see that Q&A as well. So you're welcome to type your Q&A. You're welcome to come off mute and have conversation if you want to. There's no pressure to do so. Yeah, so you can do that at any point through the webinar. We will look to pick up those questions probably at the end, unless there's anything that we note that is particularly relevant to that point in time. There may be questions that come up that we cover later on in the webinar, and we'll absolutely do that. So as I say, got around half an hour's worth of content, so we've got plenty of time for Q&A at the end should we need it. So yeah, so thank you for joining us for this webinar for turning reporting into control with modern PPM. This is a really exciting and interesting subject, particularly for me. And I was actually at PMO conference last week where I had this conversation with a number of I say PMO goers, I don't know the term to use, but project managers, program managers, PMO directors, and they were talking much more around this space into with a modern PPM solution, what could we be doing and what should we be doing with the tools that we've got at hand. So there's some really interesting stuff to chat through as we work our way through today. So conscious, some of you may or may not know who we are. So just a quick introduction as to who we are, who CPS are. So CPS are a Microsoft solutions partner fundamentally. So we work across the entire Microsoft technology stack. We are particularly pleased to be, or for last year, to be Microsoft Partner of the Year finalist for our Copilot and AI practices, but we have a huge and long-standing expertise in Microsoft PPM. We've won multiple awards in the PPM space. My personal background before doing the role that I'm doing at the moment was I was a senior PPM consultant delivering project and program management solutions into various customers across all sectors, but particularly heavy within the public sector. So I come from that background. It's something that's passionate to me. And I think with the movement towards agentic PPM, and I guess we wouldn't be a Microsoft partner without using the word AI at times throughout this presentation. I'm really excited as to what we can do for PMOs in terms of reporting and particularly of analytics and things like that. We have a number of different SC cleared and vetting cleared resources, which we have to work heavily within the Microsoft sector. We have Microsoft MVPs. So that's where Microsoft basically awards individuals with their contributions to communities within the technology sector. And on the right hand side, I won't go through them, but we're on a number of frameworks, as you would expect us to be able to operate within not just the public sector, but the commercial sector as well. So I'm going to start with this quote, and this really came about from my time at PMO conference last week. And we were spending a lot of time talking about what a future PMO could look like. So moving away from running around gathering updates, chasing people for reports and resourcing decisions and timesheets and various other bits and pieces, and actually moving them more into a team that is enabling leaders to make better decisions. And there's lots of conversations last week around what people can do and what they can't do. And over the weekend, I kind of distilled it into this sentence, and I believe this fits pretty well, particularly the last part around creating a team that enables leaders to make better decisions. And that's one of the things that we're going to focus on as we work through the webinar today. So before we get cracking, I'd like to ask you all a question around what the primary purpose of reporting is in your organization today. So this can be a single word answer. This can be a sentence, and we should see a poll pop up shortly for you to contribute to. But I'm really intrigued to understand what you believe the primary purpose of reporting. And when I say reporting, I'm talking PPM reporting, so project, program, portfolio management based reporting, and what that primary purpose is within your organizations today. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to so we've got assurance, performance. Yep, absolutely. Leaders, better decisions. Yep. Any others? Oh, they're coming through now. Status updates. Yep. Strategies. Strategy is an interesting one. I like that. Performance related risks and decisions. Management and members. Budgets. Projects, decisions, updates. Status updates, governance, performance related. Okay, so they're getting smaller. So we have a number of themes here, but particularly updates, assurance, performance, in fundamentally informing people of what's happened. Escalation's a really interesting one. Milestones, lessons learned, budget, quality, absolutely fantastic. So very common set of answers there, and exactly what to some extent mirrors the conversations I was having last week and where this webinar is pitched today. So there's an awful lot in here around the reporting, which is retrospective. So it's updating people on things that have happened, which is a vital role and is absolutely needed. What I'd like to focus on today is how we can move away from reporting being retrospective and being a little bit more in terms of intelligent and forecasting, and taking us to a position where we're able to analyze data and we're able to predict what we think might happen. So whilst we have the perspective of what happened, we can spend a bit more time advising the business on what we believe could happen based on the reporting that we've got so far. So thank you for that. Okay, so on to my next slide. Let me just switch screens. So I just had to switch screens to get back into the control. So one of the massive pressures that you're all seeing, and I think this isn't really just a pressure within the public sector, it's a pressure just throughout industry. And there's a massive challenge about not delivering more projects as such, but it's about making better decisions and doing more with less. So there are a number of different funding and resourcing constraints that we're seeing. So we're seeing tighter budgets within the public sector. Budgets that were already tight are getting tighter. Money that you think you had is no longer there. Money that you were promised is then taken away. We have a huge amount of limited resources. Those resources aren't just people. A number of you work in industries where your resources is more around equipment and access to technology and things like that. There's an increasing cost pressure everywhere. I think that exists wherever we are. Costs are increasing, salaries are increasing, overheads are increasing. We're having to do a huge amount more, but often we're not able to either get more budget or charge more for the services that we're delivering. And we have a limited delivery capacity. There's only so much time that we have. There's only so many hours in a week that people can work. And on the flip side, what we're seeing is a massive demand for services, particularly those working in the public sector. The demand for services is increasing, whereas everything on the left-hand side is decreasing. The demand is getting heavier. We're seeing a much greater scrutiny on what we're doing. We're much more accountable, or we seem to be more accountable than we've ever been before. A lot more people have opinions. They're easier to get. They're easier to share. So there's a huge level of security and accountability. We're seeing constant change, particularly any of you who are working in the tech space. The rate in which technology is changing. By the time you've actually looked to adopt something or a new way of working, there's a change that's come along, and you have to change the way you're doing it. We're seeing scenarios at the moment where organizations are rolling out pieces of technology, and by the time they're rolled out and adopted, they've changed. So it's a constant change cycle that we're facing, and expectations are incredibly high. So there's a massive balance here around the fact that we just have to be able to do more with less. And it's not a strategy. It's not that it's a case of an organization wants to do more with less. We absolutely have to. So with that in mind, I do have another quick poll just around the biggest challenges that you have within your portfolios right now. And when I say portfolio, we can talk project, program, or portfolio, but what are the biggest challenges you see? Just give it a few minutes for the word cloud to populate. Prioritization, visibility. Visibility is a really interesting one, actually. I can't see who put these ones down, but I'd be really intrigued to understand on that I guess the tools and things that you're using around visibility, and why those things aren't as visible as you want them to be. Benefits is great. We don't talk enough about benefits, I don't think, as project program or portfolio offices. Everything we do should be delivering a benefit, but we're really poor at actually tracking benefits, particularly once projects are closed. So that's really useful, and I do come onto that a little bit later. Benefits realization, prioritization, resourcing. Sponsor demands, there's a great one, actually. Yes, particularly if they change. So there is a webinar that we sadly had to cancel last week because I was unexpectedly unavailable. And we were talking a lot about Project Drift, and we are going to schedule that one for a little bit later on. But there's a lot in there around sponsor demands, actually, and how sponsors change their minds, but don't necessarily admit to the fact they're changing their minds. And before you know it, you're delivering a very different project to the one you were expecting to deliver originally. Fantastic. Yeah, so capacity, capability, benefit. It's so good to see benefits up here. We don't see benefits enough. Change, capturing benefits, budgets, change of portfolios. Fantastic. Great stuff. Thank you. So with that in mind, I guess the challenges that we're seeing. Let me move to the screen again. Just gonna have a bit of a talk through on this slide around what leaders actually need to know, and I focus this around what current reporting methods tell us versus what leaders actually want to know. So we talked about it a bit in the very first slide where I talked about what the primary purpose of reporting is within your organization. And it's very close to what we see in this left-hand box. So what current reporting tells us is the project status. So it tells us what has happened on the project in the last week, month, 3 months, depending on what your reporting cycle might look like. Valuable information. It's brilliant. It's absolutely needed. But it's very retrospective. It's a look back at what has happened. It tells us our risk appetite, particularly if we are consolidating risks and issues across projects and programs, and then moving that into a consolidated risk report. So it starts to tell us how risky our projects are across either individual or groups of projects. It gives us a number of retrospective updates. So it gives us a number of challenges, things that have happened, work that's been complete, milestones that have been missed or completed. It's not necessarily missed. And it tells us around our lessons learned. So it tells us some really vital information around what has gone wrong, and therefore, if we decide to run formal lessons learned processes, what we could do and what we could change moving forwards. So current reporting methods are fantastic. They are absolutely needed and they shouldn't go anywhere, but they're very good at telling us what happened. What leaders need to know in order to make some of the decisions on the previous word cloud we had. So there were things in there around, needing to make better decisions, looking at benefits, looking at prioritization. Leaders need to know a different set of information that probably isn't the retrospective reporting that we're using at the moment in order to support you with the projects and programs and portfolios that you're running with the issues that you're seeing on that previous word cloud. So they need to know what intervention is required and where is it required. They need to know which teams are overloaded, how can they support with the resourcing constraints, which skill sets do they need, which skill sets do they have excess of, where could they retrain individuals to pick up new skills and fix the hot spots within your resourcing charts. They need to know which projects and programs are likely to fail next, which is a really interesting conversation. So based on some data, what do we think might happen to the projects and programs that are currently green? Because if they're currently green, they're often ignored. I actually worked at an organization once where the green projects were kind of left alone. The red projects had some focus, but the amber projects were the one where the significant amount of time was faced because that's where they saw their biggest amount of risk. I did have one director actually that I worked for who didn't believe any project could ever be green. And in a project review meeting, if anybody came with a green rag, that got interrogated to a level far more than something that was already red, which was quite interesting. But there is some information to say, based on the data we have, which projects and programs are likely to fail next. And the other thing, particularly around the benefits piece, which was in the cloud you showed just now, which initiatives should we stop? And if we're not tracking benefits, or particularly perceived benefits or forecasted benefits, how do we know which initiatives we could stop? There are far too many initiatives, both in the public sector and outside, that probably should have been stopped and never were, or they were stopped way too late. So if we're not tracking the benefits realization piece, or at least the forecast benefits, if the forecast benefits look to be changing from what we originally agreed, why are we continuing with the project? Why is it not stopped in replace of something else that we will think will deliver better value? And without some really good insights, that's a really difficult decision to make. Nobody wants to say, we've plowed £3 million into a program that's now only going to deliver £1 million worth of benefits. Let's stop it. Nobody wants to be the executive that makes that decision, but actually it is a decision that needs to be made and isn't made often enough. So good governance isn't just about knowing what's happened, it's about knowing what we can do next. So in order to support that, and it is a shift change, we have a modern PPM toolset, and I'll just talk you through this slide in a little bit more detail. So on the left-hand side, we have I guess we have a flow. So we have reporting. So we have reporting, which we've just spoken about, which is what has happened. We do have insights now. I think with a lot of modern tools that, particularly in the Microsoft domain that we're providing, there are more insights, so we can understand performance better. We can automate some of that. We can understand risk profiles. We can understand dependency. So we can absolutely look at what's happening. So I think those two boxes we actually do really well now. You know, whether you're using a Microsoft-based tool or a completely different based tool, if you have a modern PPM tool, you can do those things pretty well right now, as long as you have, looking at that bottom pillar, solid data, process, governance, and the foundations that underpin those. And I'll come on to those in a second. Where we want to move to with modern PPM is these second two boxes. So we want to be able to move to prediction. So we want to be able to potentially forecast outcomes, anticipate risks that haven't happened yet. Not necessarily anticipate issues, because an issue is clearly something that's here right now, but actually start to focus on what's likely to happen based on the data that we've got currently, which I'll come on to a little bit more later. And then moving forward, which is a little bit scarier, actually have a PPM tool that doesn't make the decisions for us, but actually starts to give us some control of our portfolio. So it gives us AI-driven insights that are supporting proactive decisions. It's thinking about the interventions that need to be made, and looking at resource optimization across the patch. Now, to do any of that, particularly the last two pillars in that box, but to be honest, the first two as well, it's not just about having a technology platform such as Microsoft Copilot sitting on top of the data you've got right now. You have to have solid data. The data that underpins this is key. Your AI tool, or any tool that you're using right now, even if you're just automating your highlight reports, unless your data is good, you're going to end up with an automated report that isn't telling you the truth. And as we move through this scale, you're going to end up with a predictive analytics tool that is predicting things based on very poor and out-of-date data. So we have to have solid data. We therefore also have to have solid processes around that data, the data that needs to be in there, how often it's updated, who it's updated by, who performs the checks. And then we have to have the right governance in place as well, in terms of making sure that we're linking our strategy to our delivery, making sure that we're doing lessons learned properly, making sure that we are putting in the right projects into the portfolio, or at least if in the future we're going to be asking AI to tell us which projects we should be doing, we have to make sure that we're putting in the right benefits, and we're prioritizing and scoring those projects in the right way. And if we get that right, we will be able to make better decisions at the right time, if not early. We will be able to optimize our resources and investments. We will be able to improve services and outcomes for the people that we are serving, and those people who are the end customers of the projects we're delivering. And we will absolutely be able to add in confidence within the delivery space. So as I say, we're very much focused, I think, as a PPM, I'll say industry, on those first two pillars right now. I think we've got really good at that. I think most organizations are using some kind of PPM tool. They have some kind of automated reporting. They have all their data in one place, single repository. Everybody's using the same risk and issue log templates. Everyone's using the same lessons learned templates, dependency templates, which is enabling us to automate our reporting, and it's enabling us to understand what's happening. The next step is then moving into prediction control, which I'll come on to a little bit later. So with that in mind, and I'm going to start to talk about how AI can support that, which I think probably will be no surprise, bearing in mind everything we're doing in life right now has a sprinkling of AI over the top of it. But where do you believe, based on, I guess, some of those previous slides, or where you are within your current AI journey within your organization, where do you believe AI could deliver the biggest benefit to your PMO? I'd also be intrigued, and you don't necessarily have to put it into this word cloud, but by all means put it into the chat and the Q&A, as to where you are as an organization in that journey, actually, as to whether you're using AI, Copilot, any other AI tools out there. A lot of people are using Copilot because it's obviously linked to the Microsoft domain, and most organizations are using Microsoft toolsets, but there are a whole host of AI platforms out there that all have their own benefits. So we've got here project documentation, reporting analysis, automation standardizations, insight and analysis, automated reporting time. Yeah. Because one of the things you'll be pleased to know, the next slide, I'm going to show you a couple of example AI agents, and certainly one of those is actually in use within the public sector right now, which is quite interesting, and within a very secure area of the public sector, which is really interesting to me, because it's showing that actually the adoption of these tools can be done. A lot of the time people say, oh, it can't be done because we're behind the curve, or we don't adopt technology the fastest, or whatever the feedback might be. But actually there are a lot of people who have access to these tools, and are doing some really cool things, which is quite exciting. Okay, skills matching, drafting documentation, insight documentation, project scoping, automated reporting, standardization, prioritization, issues, report analysis. Fantastic. Thank you for your feedback, and I will keep an eye on the chat, which I'll come back to in a second, but I can't always see once I'm moving through slides, but I will keep an eye on the chat as well, just to see what comes in there. So okay, so where can AI help? So you may or may not have come across this concept of agents. Certainly if you're looking at the all the Microsoft materials and the Microsoft information comes out, they are talking very heavily around agents right now. So the way I tried to explain an agent the other day to somebody was, in really simple terms, for many years you've been able to go onto a website and you get the kind of little bot that comes up on the right or left hand side, and it's an automated assistant, and you ask it a load of questions, and it's really unhelpful, right? And it doesn't give you the answer you want, and in the end you just start typing, can you just put me through to somebody, please? And it's very much a bot that exists on a website. An agent is a far, far, far better version of that. Okay, so we're able to take agents can be trained on your data only. They can be grounded on a data set that you control. So that could be your internal processes, that could be your Dataverse database, if you're using Planner Premium, all the data stored in Dataverse. So it could be an agent that you just sit on top of that. So it doesn't go anywhere else in the organization. It doesn't certainly doesn't go outside to any external websites to bring back data that you wouldn't want it to bring back. And it's very much trained and grounded on the data you choose, and you can train it. You can talk about how it interacts with others. So where if somebody asks me a question that says, I want you to resolve this risk for me, you could make it come back and say, well, actually, no, I'm afraid I can't do that. So it can start to you can put a bit of safety in it, in essence, so that it doesn't give answers that you don't want it to give. Or if it does, it caveats them with things that says, that give people examples. I was chatting to a customer recently. They were a construction firm. They wanted to be in a position where they had an agent, when somebody just mentioned the word asbestos, it suddenly went and with an automation flow sent emails to various different people and put huge controls around what that person could then do with that piece of data, which was really interesting for them, particularly exciting for a number of them, because it was a process that was very manual before now. So that's, I guess, the difference with an agent. So where they can help. So predictive analytics is, I guess, the first place that we can get them to help. We saw some of that on the work cloud that we looked at just now. So I think today PMOs are very good at telling us what's already happened. We've spoken about that. We produce reports, we produce RAG reports, milestone updates, governance packs. But by the time an issue appears, it's often already impacting delivery. And this, for me, is where the opportunity with AI is to move from that reporting to control. So a PMO agent, as an example, could provide a single conversational interface across your entire project and portfolio stack with resource data, financial data, and rather than kind of building reports or searching across multiple systems, leaders and PMO people can start to ask it questions, which are such as which projects are at risk, who's overloaded, what's changed since the last committee meeting. They could come in on a Monday morning and say, what's happened to my portfolio over the last week, please? And it could come back and say, well, these 3 projects have moved from green to amber, therefore you might want to have a look. Actually, across these 5 projects, they've all raised risks around this particular resource or this particular availability of a piece of technology. Therefore, I predict you might start to get some issues on these projects moving forward. You might want to do something about it in advance. And you'll get instant answers from grounded data that exists within your solution. Predictive analytics goes that little bit step further. So instead of telling us which projects are red today, it identifies the projects that are likely to be red based on some trends that it can see. So based on previous projects, when they've had these 5 risks come about, or when they've seen these delays in these particular parts of the project, they've all ended up X days late. Therefore, we're starting to see that pattern on this set of projects. So you might want to have a look at these. We think these are likely to become red in the future. So it can look at emerging risks. It can look at resource bottlenecks, look at delivery drifts, budget pressures, missed milestones, and try to predict them before they become a major problem moving forward. The result of that being better decision making, earlier intervention, a reduced PMO effort in terms of running around having to gather updates, more time spending analyze data, and actually being able to provide those proactive updates to the leadership team, so that on the slide we looked at a couple of slides ago, we're actually providing better data to enable the leaders to make decisions. So I guess in simple terms, a PMO agent would tell us what's happening. Predictive analytics will tell us what's likely to happen next. And I think if you pair them together, they'll help leaders decide what action to take now. And this is a massive shift from retrospective reporting to proactive portfolio control. Now, this sounds wonderful, and I'm sure a number of you sat there saying it sounds great, but as I said, there are organizations who are using the PMO agents and to some extent the predictive analytics now, and are seeing significant value in doing so. If it's something that interests you, the right-hand side of this slide is very busy, and I'm not going to talk through it in a huge amount of data, but depending where you are on that AI journey, whether you have access to Copilot, whether you have access to Copilot Studio, or any other AI tools that might be out there, there's a really key framework to go through in order to make sure that you're building the right agents, because you can build an agent for almost anything, but you want to make sure you're building one that's delivering the greatest value. So the first thing is that top orange box, I should say, is identifying the business problem. All this focuses on business problems. What are you doing right now within your PMOs, within your project and program management spaces that's taking you a huge amount of time that you think an agent or AI could help you with? So you don't necessarily need to understand how. It's thinking, what is the problem and how could it be helped? So we were looking at some of the work cloud earlier. There's things around automating documentation. If you could automate 90% of a PID, if you could automate 90% of a business case, and then you're able, based on data that you control, so it's not just going off to Google and finding stuff that isn't true, but based on data you control, you can save yourselves a huge amount of time. So the first thing is to identify the business cases, the use cases based on the business problems you have. You would then validate them, validate that it's something you want to do, validate there is a return on investment. We then move into a build phase that exists within that validate phase. And then it's a case of measuring success, scaling it if we need to. So starting it very small with maybe a small pilot user group, and then scaling it out to the wider business if we want to, and then moving it into a sustainment model. And that's something we're spending a lot of time with customers about at the moment, particularly in that orange box, in that identify stage. We have a concept called a agent-a-thon, which for those of you who have come across hackathons, it's a similar concept, much less technical, very much sitting down in a room with people from across the business to identify where those real pain points are. For any of this to work, and there's some really cool stuff in here that we can do, and we've talked about needing to have solid data foundations and all your information in one place for this to work. But for any of this to work, there are, I guess, 6 key things that have to happen. And this is quite an interesting slide for any piece of business change, not just the rolling out of PPM based technology solutions. So the first thing you need to have, which I'm sure everybody on this call knows, is executive sponsorship. So someone who's absolutely behind this and wants to drive this forward. If you don't have it, it's really difficult to bring people in on that journey. So you need to have executive sponsorship. I laughed a bit about on one of the previous word clouds and the sponsor changing their mind. So yes, we need direction and accountability. Probably also need a sponsor that's going to stick to the original scope of what it was that they were sponsoring. We then need a solid program lead. So we need somebody to coordinate and deliver this piece of work or this change. We need to have some business ownership. Somebody needs to own the outcomes and the adoption of this tool. We need access to, say, the front line, but fundamentally you need access to the people who have got the business problems. A couple of years ago, I was in a session when Copilot was just coming out, and somebody said to me that Copilot, the business case isn't sold in the boardroom. You're not going to get a group of executives who decide that this is the right thing to do. It has to be driven from the front line, the people who are spending hours and hours and hours doing these manual tasks, who could be spending their time in a way better way. They could be spending that time, we spoke about PMOs earlier, instead of chasing reports and chasing timesheets and chasing updates, analyzing data and seeing what the trends look like. So we have to have access to that frontline team. We have to have IT and data. That's key. I can't explain how important the quality of data is if you're going to do any kind of automation at all. Even the most simplest automation of automating a highlight report that's currently manually produced, that needs a significant set of quality data. If you're then going to move to the position which is the far end of the scale around predictive analytics based on the data that exists within your PPM system or your databases of information, that data's got to be good if you're going to be asking a tool to predict what might happen on your projects and programs. And then finally, we need really solid governance. So we need a governance framework. The people element, the process element is as important as ever to make sure that people are using the tools in the way we want them to. So some really exciting stuff that we can do, with a modern PPM solution to move us away from our retrospective reporting into something that's a little bit more forecast based. So I guess I come back to my original point around the future PMO isn't a team that produces the best reports. It's a team that enables leaders to make the better decisions. In terms of where we're helping customers, we can do an AI art of the possible. Doesn't matter where you are on that Copilot journey. There are a number of organizations who actually have Copilot licenses and actually have Microsoft funding available to them to fund that. So it doesn't actually cost them anything to do some of that art of the possible work, to really sit down and talk through what you could do. We clearly can do PPM current state assessments on both processes and tools. So if you have a tool set at the moment that you've got in that's not quite working for you, we can analyze that. If you have processes that aren't working, we can absolutely analyze those as well, because you need that part really to be able to move into any of this automation. And then, of course, we can do things like agent-a-thons, where we can sit down with groups of people and start to tease out where these use cases might look like. And even if you have internal teams who can build these agents for you, actually having somebody come in who can come and support you with that kind of agent-a-thon and sit down and run that session is incredibly valuable. So in terms of slides, that's it from me. I'm going to move over to a Q&A piece now. I'm just going to have a look at the notes in the chat as well, just to see if there's anything in there. But if you do have any questions, please do either come off mute and have the conversation, I'm just going to mute Anthony, who I think is on possibly on the phone. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat. If you want to come off mute and have a conversation around any of this, please do. But let me just have a quick look. So it says, my organization's limited Copilot version 50 full license for testing and feedback due to very sensitive information. Yeah, there are a number of customers in that space. I think the beauty of Copilot, as long as it's deployed correctly, is that Copilot only gives people access to the data they already had access to. And that's the bit that people don't realize. It doesn't suddenly open up a whole host of data that an individual didn't have access to. What often happens is people don't realize how much information people in their workforce do have access to. So what it does is it very quickly shows you where you potentially don't have your security and restrictions in the right places. So it's the way it's built in, the way Copilot works is if I search for particular files or information that I don't have access to currently, I won't see it. Now, if it does bring back something I couldn't see, it means I always had access to that. I just didn't know how to get it. So actually, it could just make it easier to find things. So we do see a lot of that. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope wherever you are, you're not melting too much. I think it's hot pretty much everywhere in the UK right now, isn't it? So yeah, please do take the necessary precautions, enjoy the rest of your day. And yeah, I look forward to sharing the slides and the recording with you all. And if anybody's got any more questions, then please do let us know.